You'll share my bed tonight or freeze to death, Mountain Man told the obese runaway bride. Call off the wedding. My son won't marry a farm-bred heifer. The words cracked through the chapel of Silverstone like a whip. Gasps rippled over velvet pews. Candles guttered in a draught. At the altar, Penelope Penny Ashford, lace veil trembling, bouquet crushed in white-knuckled fingers, stood very still as Christopher Hartwell's mother rose in glittering furs and contempt. Christopher himself didn't meet Penny's eyes. He tugged at his cuffs, jaw tight, and spoke loudly enough for the gallery to hear. I was deceived. The photograph was 5 years and 30 pounds old. I won't be shackled to a lie. A stain of silence spread across the aisle. Then the whispers started, cruel, eager, hungry. Someone snickered. Someone else coughed. Look at the gown, ready to burst. Penny tried to answer, breath snagging in a stitched bodice. It was me. It is me. But the minister closed his book and stepped back, as if sin itself had taken human form. Christopher's mother turned to Penny's father, thin in a borrowed suit. You'll return every cent, travel, flowers, the orchestra, or the Hartwells will see you in court. We have nothing left, he stammered, and the pity on his face hurt worse than laughter. Penny felt the world tilt. The organist shut the lid. Petals littered her shoes like small, soft failures. If she didn't move, she would break. So she moved. She pushed past satin skirts, past a wall of stairs, past a boy who whispered, "Run, miss!" And she ran, veil snagging, pearls popping like hail, out into the white glare of a winter afternoon. Snow met her in brittle fists. She ran through the square, past the smithy, past the sign that said Silverstone Mercantile, past a line of sleds creaking under burlap. Laughter followed. Then it faded. The hills took her. Pines swallowed the road. The sky lowered on iron hinges. An hour later, her lungs were raw. Her satin slippers had become 2 small coffins for her feet. She stumbled into a stand of fur, collapsed, and pressed her cheek to the snow. It burned, then numbed. The cold began its quiet arithmetic. She thought of warm bread, of her father's shaking hands, of a life that had only ever almost started. "Please," she whispered to no one, "please, not like this." Branches shifted. Not wind. Wait. A shape detached from the trees, tall, broad, fur-lined coat, powdered with frost. A man. He moved without hurry, the way storms move, inevitable. A leather hood shadowed his face. When he lifted it, she saw eyes the color of old walnut and a scar like a question mark at his jaw. He looked from the ripped gown to her blue lips and spoke in a voice made for winter. "Get up," he said, and the snow seemed to listen. Penelope Ashford had never felt small a day in her life, until now. In Boston, her father had called her sturdy, her mother well-fed for the cold. She had believed those words were kindnesses, but here, in the glittering church of Silverstone, they had become verdicts. The woman who once dreamed of lace and laughter now sat shivering beneath a mountain of fur that did not belong to her, her white gown a ruin of torn seams and mud. Matthias Matt Blackwood reined his horse to a stop beside her. The animal's breath steamed in the twilight. Its eyes flicked uneasily toward the pale figure half buried in the drift. Matt crouched beside her, massive and silent. His gloves were scarred from years of trapping and axe work, his beard stiff with snow. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but sure. "You can't stay here. You'll be gone before dawn." Penny tried to answer, but her lips trembled too hard to form words. He slipped his heavy coat around her shoulders the inside still warm from his body. It engulfed her completely, smelling faintly of pine smoke and something darker. Gun oil, maybe, or the deep musk of wilderness. "Can you walk?" She shook her head. I don't know where I am." "Halfway to freezing," he said. "Hold on." He lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. Penny's cheek brushed against the rough wool of his shirt, and for a dizzy second she realized she could hear his heartbeat. Steady, slow, impossibly calm. Every step he took crunched through ice crusts that had swallowed lesser men. The world blurred around them, moonlight scattered through falling snow like shattered glass. Penny tried to speak again. Why are you helping me?" Matt's breath clouded in front of them. "Because I've buried too many things out here already." They climbed until the trees thickened and the wind turned from knives to whispers. By the time the cabin appeared, a squat shape of logs tucked into the curve of a mountain shoulder, Penny was drifting in and out of consciousness. Matt kicked open the door, carried her inside, and laid her near the fire pit. The single-room home was spare but solid, animal pelts on the walls, iron pots hanging from hooks, a wide bed built from pine slabs. The kind of place where a man lived with ghosts and routine. He moved fast, stripping kindling, stacking logs, striking flint until flame flared orange across the dark. Penny stirred, eyes fluttering open. She tried to sit, but the sudden heat made her dizzy. "Stay still," Matt said, kneeling beside her. "You're safe here." "Safe," she echoed, as if testing the word. When she finally found her voice, it came soft and broken. "I'm not supposed to be here. I was supposed to marry—" She swallowed. "He didn't want me." Matt looked at her, brow furrowed. "Then he's a fool." The words were simple, almost offhand, but they landed in her chest like a spark in dry tinder. No one had ever called a man a fool for rejecting her before. Usually they said, "Understandable." He stood and began unpacking a satchel, dried venison, matches, a coil of rope, bullets in a tin. "You'll need dry clothes," he said. "There's a trunk by the wall, my late wife's things. Take what fits." Penny hesitated. "Your wife?" "8 years gone," he said. "Fever took her and the baby in the same week." The silence after that was heavy, like snowfall before a break. Penny's throat ached. "I'm sorry." He gave a short nod and turned away. "Don't be. Just change before you catch your death." When she emerged from behind the screen, drowned in a wool dress that had once belonged to another woman, Matt was ladling stew from a blackened pot. He gestured for her to sit. The food burned her tongue, and she didn't care. For the first time in months, warmth spread through her limbs. But Matt was watching her carefully, his jaw tight. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll take you back down to the road. You can find a wagon heading east." Penny froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. "You want me to leave?" "I'm not a man who keeps company," he said flatly, "and this mountain's no place for someone who doesn't know it." The thought of going back, to laughter, to shame, sent a chill down her spine, sharper than any wind. "Please," she whispered, "don't send me away tonight." Matt looked at her for a long time, the firelight reflected in his eyes. Then he nodded once. "You'll stay, but it'll hit 30 below before sunrise. If you sleep by the hearth, you'll freeze." Her heart stumbled. "What are you saying?" He met her gaze, his tone calm, factual, not cruel. "You'll share my bed tonight, or you won't wake up at all." For a long moment, Penny could only hear the fire crackling and the storm clawing at the shutters. His words hung in the air like the mountain wind, sharp, cold, and heavy with truth. "Share your bed?" she repeated, her voice barely more than a whisper. Matt didn't flinch. "It's not a request," he said, quiet but firm. "Out here, cold doesn't care what's proper. You'll die if you sleep alone." The blunt certainty in his tone made her cheeks flush hotter than the fire. Penny's hands twisted in the hem of her borrowed dress. The world she knew, of tea parties and lace gloves, of fathers arranging marriages to erase debt, felt impossibly far away. Out here there was no pride, no etiquette, only survival. She nodded once. I understand." Matt said nothing more. He stood, moved to the window, and watched the snow lash the glass. The muscles in his shoulders tensed beneath his flannel shirt. His silhouette looked carved from the same stone as the mountain itself. When he finally turned back, his expression was unreadable. "You can take the left side," he said simply, pointing toward the bed. "I'll keep the fire stoked." Penny hesitated at the edge of the mattress. The quilts were thick and worn, the scent of smoke and pine clinging to them. When she lay down, her whole body trembled, partly from the cold, partly from something she couldn't name. Matt extinguished the lantern, then stretched out on the other side, leaving a careful gulf of space between them. For a while they lay there listening to the wind scream through the eaves, but as the hours passed, the warmth of the fire faded and the frost crept closer. Her teeth began to chatter. She tried to stay still, but her body betrayed her. Matt shifted. "You're shaking." I'm fine," she lied. He turned toward her, voice low. "You're not. Come closer." When she didn't move, he reached out slowly, his calloused hand resting lightly on her arm. "It's just warmth, Penny. Nothing more." Something in his tone, steady, protective, made her believe him. She turned, hesitantly, until her back pressed against his chest. His body radiated heat like a living furnace. When his arm came around her waist, she stiffened for an instant, then exhaled. The cold retreated inch by inch. She could feel his breath against her neck, slow and deep. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." "Sleep," he murmured. But she didn't, not right away. For a long time, Penny lay awake, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat against her spine. It was steady and grounding, the first safe sound she'd known in months. Her mind drifted through flashes of the day, the church, the laughter, the snow, and then to him, this stranger who'd appeared when the world turned its back. At some point, exhaustion won. She fell asleep within his arms, her breath sinking to his, and the storm outside softened into silence. When she woke, pale sunlight was filtering through the frosted window. The fire had burned low, but the room was warm. Matt was gone. The other side of the bed was empty, except for a folded blanket and a small wooden tray holding a steaming mug. Penny sat up, blinking. The scent of herbs and honey filled the room. There was a note beneath the cup, scrawled in a rough but careful hand. "Went to check traps. Drink this. It'll help you breathe easier." Her fingers brushed the ink. No man had ever written her a note before. She sipped the tea, then wandered toward the window. The view took her breath away. The world outside glittered under a sheet of snow, untouched and endless. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. A hawk circled above the pines. She caught her reflection in the frosted glass, hair tangled, cheeks flushed, wrapped in a dead woman's wool dress, and almost didn't recognize herself. There was something new in her eyes. Not shame, not fear, but defiance. When Matt returned, He stomped the snow from his boots and set a bundle of fresh pelts near the door. "You're awake," he said, surprised. "I figured you'd sleep half the day." "I couldn't," she admitted. "It's too quiet when you're gone." He paused, studying her. "Quiet's a blessing out here." "Maybe for you," she said softly, "but I've had enough silence to last a lifetime." He frowned as if unsure what to do with that truth. Then, wordlessly, he handed her a piece of bread spread with bear fat and honey. "Eat," he said. She smiled faintly. "You always sound like an order." "I don't mean it that way." "I know," she said, and her voice was gentler than she meant it to be. After breakfast, he showed her how to stack firewood, how to mend a torn glove, how to keep the smoke from choking the chimney. She listened, eager to learn, eager for the distraction. When she laughed, an unguarded, surprised laugh, he looked up sharply, as though he hadn't heard such a sound in years. The day passed quietly, but not emptily. That night, when the wind rose again and the temperature dropped, he hesitated before blowing out the lantern. "I'll take the floor," he said. "No," she whispered. "Please stay, just like last night." He hesitated, then nodded, climbing into bed beside her. The distance between them was smaller this time. Her head found its place against his shoulder without asking. Outside, the snow fell again, silent, relentless, pure. Inside, two strangers lay beneath the same quilt, their hearts beating in the fragile rhythm of beginning. By the third morning, Penny no longer felt like a runaway bride hiding in someone else's life. The snow had sealed the mountain passes, the outside world nothing but memory. Every sound, fire crackling, kettle hissing, the rhythmic chop of Matt's axe outside, belonged to a new rhythm, a rhythm that was theirs. She had begun to move with purpose. At dawn, she swept the cabin floor, careful not to disturb the rifle leaning by the door. She washed dishes in melted snow water, her breath misting above the basin. At first, Matt protested, "You don't have to do that." But she only smiled. "You gave me shelter. Let me make it a home." He didn't argue again. Matt spent his mornings hunting. Penny could hear his boots crunching through the drifts, fading into distance, then returning at dusk with game slung over his shoulder, elk, hare, sometimes a brace of grouse. His shoulders filled the doorway, and each time she saw him return safely, her chest eased a little more. He'd nod toward the fire. "Another day done," he'd say, simple words that meant everything. She learned his patterns, how he hummed low when carving wood, how he never spoke while eating but always cleaned his plate, how he paused a heartbeat before entering the cabin, as if bracing against the weight of memory, and in turn he began to learn her small ways, how she hummed to herself while kneading dough, how she tilted her head when she was curious, how she talked softly to the kettle as if it were a friend. One evening, while she mended a torn sleeve, Matt broke the quiet. "You're not what I expected," he said. Penny looked up. "Expected? Most folks from towns like yours break after 2 days up here. You didn't." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I was already broken before I came." He studied her a long moment. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe you just learned to bend." The firelight flickered across his face, softening the hard planes of it. She wanted to ask more, but his eyes had already gone back to the flames. Days became weeks. Snow layered the roof like thick frosting. Icicles grew long enough to sing when the wind passed. Penny began to find a quiet joy in the routine. She baked cornbread that filled the room with warmth. she polished the window glass so sunlight could sneak through. Sometimes she caught Matt watching her from the doorway, expression unreadable, but not cold. One night, while she stirred a pot of stew, he reached above her to grab a spice jar from the shelf. His arm brushed her shoulder, an accidental touch, brief but grounding. She froze. So did he. The air between them thickened. When she turned, their faces were only inches apart. For a heartbeat, she forgot how to breathe. He stepped back first, his voice rough. "It's good you're finding your way around." She nodded quickly. "It's easier when you make me feel safe." That word struck something in him. Safe, he repeated almost to himself, like it was a language he hadn't spoken in years. A storm rolled in that night, fierce, howling, a siege of snow. The roof creaked under its weight. Matt checked the door bolts, then fed another log into the fire. "We'll ride it out," he said. 3 days, maybe 4. What if we run out of wood? We won't? He pulled on his coat. But the smoke vent's icing over. I'll clear it before it clogs. She stood. "Let me help?" He shook his head. "Too cold. Stay inside." When he opened the door, wind slammed into the room like a fist. Penny's heart seized. She watched him disappear into the white blur, the storm swallowing him whole. She waited by the fire, counting breaths, every gust sounding like a scream. 10 minutes passed. 20. Fear clawed up her throat. Without thinking, she threw on her cloak and burst outside. Snow cut at her skin, visibility shrinking to inches. "Matt!" she shouted. Her voice vanished into the gale. Then, through the roar, a faint answer. She followed the sound, stumbling through drifts until she found him halfway up the slope, fighting the ladder to reach the vent. His hair was crusted with frost, his hands raw and bleeding. "You shouldn't be here," he barked over the wind. "You shouldn't be alone," she shouted back. For a moment, they glared at each other, two stubborn souls in the storm. Then the ladder slipped on ice. He fell backward, catching himself just in time. Penny lunged, grabbing his arm, anchoring him. Snow whipped around them, but neither let go. When they finally made it back inside, both were shaking from cold. Penny threw herself into the task, pulling off his coat, his gloves, forcing him toward the hearth. "You'll freeze," she scolded, her hands trembling as she rubbed warmth back into his fingers. He caught her wrist gently. "You came out there for me." "I thought you were dead," she whispered, eyes glassy. "I couldn't." Her voice broke. Matt's hand moved to her cheek, rough palm cupping her face. "You shouldn't care that much. I'm not—" "Don't say it," she interrupted. "Don't you dare tell me you're not worth saving." The room went utterly still. The fire crackled. Snow hissed against the window. He didn't let go. Instead, his thumb brushed the tears from her cheek, his voice dropping low. "Penny, what are you doing to me?" "I don't know," she breathed. "Maybe what you've been too afraid to let happen again." And before either of them could stop it, his mouth found hers. The kiss was hesitant at first, an apology, a question. Then it deepened, slow and certain, like two people remembering what it felt like to be alive. When they finally pulled apart, Penny's breath shivered in the air between them. "I should have sent you away," he said hoarsely. "But you didn't." "No," he admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "I couldn't." After that night, something shifted. They didn't speak of the kiss, but everything carried its echo. The way he brushed her hair aside when she cooked, the way she patched his shirt with careful hands. When she laughed, he smiled without realizing it. When he returned from hunting, she met him at the door. The cabin was still small, but the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was full of heartbeats. One morning, as they shared breakfast, he said quietly, "When spring comes, you'll have a choice. Go back east or stay." She looked at him across the table, the sunlight painting gold on the rough wood between them. "And if I stay?" He met her gaze, steady and sure. "Then this mountain won't be mine anymore. It'll be ours." Winter began to loosen its grip on the mountain, but not on them. Each morning brought softer light, longer days, and the quiet certainty of something fragile taking root between them. Yet, with every thawed inch of snow, the world below inched closer. The world Penny had fled, and the world Matt had buried. She felt it first. The unease, the way Matt would go silent whenever he looked toward the valley, as if listening for something only he could hear. One afternoon, she found him standing on the ridge above the cabin, staring down the trail that led toward Silverstone. "Is someone coming?" she asked. His jaw worked before he answered. "Not yet, but someone will." Penny's stomach tightened. "Christopher." Matt didn't confirm, but the look in his eyes was enough. That night, over stew and bread, she finally spoke. "If he comes, I'll face him. He doesn't own me." Matt shook his head. "You don't understand men like him. They think everything they touch belongs to them, even what they've thrown away." "Then let him try," she said, fierceness rising from somewhere new inside her. "I'm not the same woman who ran crying from that church." He almost smiled at that. Almost. But there was no mirth in his eyes. "The world doesn't care who you've become, Penny. It only remembers what it made of you." "Then maybe the world needs reminding." He looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You sound like Rebecca when you're angry." Penny froze. He rarely said her name. "Your wife?" Matt nodded slowly. "She used to say the same thing, that the world would listen if you spoke loud enough. But it didn't. It took her anyway." He stared into the fire, his voice low and cracked. "We lived farther north. She fell sick during a storm. I rode for help. 3 days through snow. When I came back, she was gone. She and the baby both." Penny's throat tightened. She reached across the table, but he didn't see her hand. He was far away, in that memory, in that guilt. "I built this cabin with my own hands," he said softly. "Every beam, every nail. I told myself if I could keep it standing, I'd keep her ghost quiet. Then you came, and she started whispering again." Penny withdrew her hand, hurt, flickering through her chest. "Do you think I'm here to replace her?" His gaze lifted, sharp and pained. "I don't know what to think any more." The silence that followed was colder than the wind outside. Days passed without laughter. Penny went about her chores quietly, careful not to cross invisible lines. Matt spent longer hours in the woods, returning after dark, shoulders stiff, voice curt. But one morning, while fetching water from the creek, Penny saw movement below the ridge, men on horseback, their coats dark against the snow. At the front rode a man she recognized instantly, even from afar, Christopher Hartwell. Fear and fury tangled inside her. She ran back to the cabin. "Matt!" He was already at the door, rifle in hand, eyes hard. "I saw them." "There are 5, she said, breathless. "Christopher and some others. What are we going to do?" "We?" His tone was rough. "You're going to stay inside and do as I say." "Matt." He turned to her, voice rising for the first time. I lost one woman because I wasn't fast enough. I won't lose another because she won't listen. Penny's heart ached, but she nodded. Just promise me you'll come back. He didn't answer, but the look he gave her said more than words. The horses stopped in the clearing. Christopher dismounted, brushing snow from his fine coat, his face twisted with arrogance. "Blackwood," he called, "I've come for what's mine." Matt stepped out from behind the porch post, rifle steady in his hands. "You've got nothing here that belongs to you." Christopher smirked. "You think I want her? Please, she's an embarrassment, but she cost me money. Passage, supplies, the wedding. Her father still owes me, and I'll have my debt paid, one way or another." "You'll leave," Matt said. "Or what?" Christopher sneered. "You'll shoot me? Over a woman who doesn't even belong to you?" Matt's finger tightened on the trigger. "She belongs to herself. That's more than you'll ever understand." Behind the window, Penny pressed her hands to her mouth, watching. Her heart pounded as two men, her past and her present, stood locked in the snow. One of Christopher's men raised his gun first. The shot tore through the silence. Matt dove, fired once, twice. A man fell. Horses screamed and bolted. Smoke from the rifles twisted through the air like breath from hell itself. When the last echo faded, Christopher was on his knees in the snow, clutching a bleeding arm. "You'll hang for this," he spat. Matt stepped forward, cold fury in every line of his face. "Maybe, but you'll crawl home before you bleed out if you want to see another sunrise." He tossed a leather pouch into the snow at Christopher's feet. Coins, tarnished, but heavy. "That's what your pride is worth. Take it and go." Christopher stared at him, hatred burning in his eyes, but fear won. He mounted his horse one-handed, snarled something no one heard, and rode back down the mountain. The others followed. When Matt came back inside, Penny flew to him. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he muttered, wiping blood from a graze at his temple. She cupped his face, tears brimming. "Don't say that. Don't you ever say that again." He caught her wrist, his eyes suddenly soft. "He's gone. You're free now." "No," she whispered, trembling. "I was free the moment you chose to stand between me and them." He let out a long breath, the tension melting from his shoulders. "You shouldn't have had to need me for that." "Maybe not," she said, her voice steady now. "But I wanted you for everything that came after." And then, as the wind howled outside, he pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Penny, I can't lose you too." "You won't," she whispered back. "Not this time. Not ever." That night, as the fire burned low, Penny bandaged his wound with trembling hands. He watched her, quiet, the lines around his eyes softening. "You said once I reminded you of her," she murmured. "Rebecca." He nodded slowly. "You do, but not because you look like her." "Then why?" "Because she made me believe I could be loved. You're the one making me believe it again." Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled. "Then don't fight it any more." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I won't." Outside, the storm had passed. The sky above the cabin cleared, stars spilling like lanterns over the mountain. And inside, two people who had run from love their whole lives finally stopped running. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Christopher's men hadn't returned, but the silence on the mountain carried a weight Penny couldn't shake. Matt's wound healed slowly. his strength returning, yet his eyes often drifted toward the valley with a soldier's vigilance. He had fought before, she realized, not just with rifles and fists, but with ghosts. One morning, the faint echo of hooves shattered the peace. Matt was already at the window before she reached the door. "They're back," he said grimly. Penny's pulse quickened. "How many?" "Too many," he murmured. 10, maybe 12. "Then we should leave," she urged. He shook his head. "There's nowhere to go. The snow's melting, but the trails are still blocked. We hold here." He loaded his rifle with steady hands, every motion practiced and precise. Penny wanted to scream, for him to stop, to run, but she saw in his face that he'd already made peace with what he had to do. When the riders reached the clearing, Christopher dismounted first. His arm was still bound, but his arrogance had returned tenfold. "You got lucky last time, Blackwood," he sneered. "This time, luck won't save you." Matt stepped out onto the porch, rifle raised. "You shouldn't have come back." "Oh, I think I should have," Christopher said. "See, the sheriff doesn't much like outlaws killing city men on his mountain, and when I tell him what you did, he'll come up here himself, with 50 more men." Matt's voice dropped low, steady as thunder. "You won't live long enough to tell him anything." Christopher smiled thinly. "You really think she'll stay with a killer? Once she sees you for what you are, she'll crawl back to me, begging." Penny couldn't stay hidden any longer. She stepped out beside Matt, her hair loose, her hands trembling, but lifted high. "You're wrong," she said, voice breaking but clear. "I would rather die on this mountain than live another day under your shadow." Christopher's expression faltered, shock, then fury. "You ungrateful sow," he spat. "Everything you had came from me." Matt's rifle fired. The shot echoed through the valley. Christopher stumbled, his hat flying off as the bullet tore past his ear. Matt hadn't missed. He'd just chosen mercy. "Take your men and go," Matt said. "Next time, I don't aim to warn." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the riders muttered, "He's right, Chris. Let's go." Another turned his horse, and one by one the men followed, leaving their humiliated leader kneeling in the snow. Christopher glared up, hate burning in his eyes, but even he knew this mountain didn't belong to him. When they vanished down the trail, the silence returned. Matt lowered the rifle, breath shaking. Penny moved to him, cupping his face with trembling hands. "You could have killed him," she whispered. "I almost did," he admitted. "But then I saw you, and I remembered I didn't build this cabin for death." Her eyes softened. "You built it for love." He looked at her, and for once didn't deny it. The days after were bright with thaw. The snow melted, the river began to sing again, and the air smelled of pine and new life. Matt's shoulders eased. The hardness in his eyes faded. Penny tended to the garden, planting seeds she'd found in a drawer labeled Rebecca's. When she told him, he smiled, a quiet, broken smile that somehow held healing. "She'd have liked that," he said. That night, as the last of the winter chill faded, Penny stood by the window, watching the stars. "You once told me this cabin was for her ghost," she said softly. Matt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It was," he murmured, "until you walked in and made it home again." Penny turned in his arms. "And what are we now, Matt Blackwood?" He rested his forehead against hers. "Alive," he said simply. "Finally alive." The fire crackled behind them. Outside, the mountain breathed in peace, and for the first time since the day she ran from the altar, Penelope Ashford didn't feel like someone escaping. She felt like someone found. Spring came slowly to Silverstone Mountain, like a wounded creature learning to trust again. The river thawed, the pines whispered new life, and the cabin, once a fortress of solitude, filled with sound. The scrape of Penny's broom, the thud of Matt's boots, the soft laughter that always caught him by surprise. Sometimes he'd watch her through the open doorway, hair loose in the sun, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed from work, and it would hit him all over again. How close he'd come to losing her before ever having her. "You're staring," she teased one morning without turning. He leaned against the post, smiling faintly. "I've earned the right to, haven't I?" She laughed. "You earned breakfast. Staring comes later." He crossed the room in 2 strides, catching her by the waist. "Then I'll take both." Her laughter broke the stillness that used to haunt these walls. It sounded like forgiveness. By late April, the trail down the mountain had cleared. Penny stood at the ridge one evening, looking toward the valley. The world she'd left shimmered below, so far, so small. Matt came to stand beside her. "You could go back now," he said quietly. "The pass is open." She didn't answer right away. The wind tugged her hair across her face. "Do you want me to?" "I want you to choose," he said. "For the first time in your life, you get to." She looked up at him, eyes bright with the kind of courage born from heartbreak. "Then I choose to stay." His breath caught. "Are you sure?" Penny smiled, a soft, knowing smile that had weathered cruelty, storms, and shame. "I ran from a man who saw me as a burden. I'm not running from the one who made me feel like I belonged." Matt reached for her hand. "Then you stay, and I'll keep you warm until the snow falls again." She laughed, leaning into him. "You already do." That night, they sat by the fire. The room glowed amber, the world outside painted in moonlight. Penny leaned against his shoulder, eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat. "What if they come again?" she murmured. "Then they'll find the mountain waiting," he said, "and the mountain doesn't bow." She smiled at that. His mountain, their mountain. The fire hissed softly as it burned lower. And in that quiet, with the storm long gone and the ghosts finally still, Matt Blackwood pressed a kiss to Penny's forehead and whispered the words she'd never been told before. "You're safe here." Her eyes shimmered as she whispered back, "I know." Outside, the night was endless, but for the first time in both their lives, it no longer felt empty. Every story that ends on this mountain begins the same way, with someone the world calls unworthy. But love, the kind that survives blizzards and bullets, doesn't ask what you look like or what you've lost. It only asks that you stay. Maybe you're listening from a quiet room or halfway across the world. But if you've ever been made to feel small, remember this: even the coldest hearts can thaw, and even the heaviest souls can find warmth again. Where are you hearing this from tonight? If you still believe in second chances, stay close. The next story is already waiting.